Now, speculations are high that Japan will go ahead with the plan next month. And today, the IAEA chief's trip to Japan comes to an end before he comes to South Korea tomorrow. For more on the issue, we're joined by Mr. Walter Sim from the Straits Times this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Walter, first off, according to Japanese reports, Japan will push ahead with the release next month, August. Now, how likely is it that Japan will do that? I mean, why is Japan trying so hard to start the release this summer in particular?
Well, Japan has been saying for months that the discharge will begin around summer. There are some conflicting reports in Japan as to when this actually will start. It could be in August, like the Nikkei reported, but it might also be slightly pushed back given that municipalities in northeast Japan are gearing up for local elections, and there are fears on the impact of summer tourism as well in the region. Nonetheless, I think the IAEA final report, which is at 129 pages long, that Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida received on Tuesday was the game changer, given that it vouched for the plant's safety. All the necessary equipment is also in place at the site. As for why this summer, well, space is fast running out at the Fukushima Nuclear Plant. There are currently more than 1,000 storage tanks. There are more than 1.3 million tons of water. Water is still being accumulated every day. These tanks are nearing full capacity, and plant operator TEPCO says there is no more space to build new tanks. And this space, TEPCO says, is needed for the decommissioning process. And this process is expected to be completed only around 2051. And if the water is not dealt with, it could be further delayed. So I guess this is why there has been some urgency in releasing the water. And Japan is saying that this needs to be done starting this summer.
Then let's say the wastewater does get released next month, and how is Japan actually planning to oversee the years-long process?
Well, rather than years long, I guess it's decades long, since the discharge, when it starts next month, is expected to continue until the full decommissioning of the plant, which, as I said earlier, is expected only around 2050s. So Japan is promising transparency. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is also going to ramp up diplomacy and provide scientifically backed explanations throughout this process. The IAEA yesterday also set up a permanent office in Fukushima. It says in its report that it is going to provide live online monitoring of the process on its website, and it will continue to conduct random interlaboratory tests of the impact on water in the Pacific Ocean.
Right. And also this week, the IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, visited the Fukushima Nuclear Plant and met with Japanese fishermen who are strongly opposed to the plant. Now, Walter, how successful do you think his trip to Japan was? I mean, do you think the trip and the report were convincing enough to persuade those who are against the release? I mean, and also, what's the public sentiment in Japan at the moment?
Well, interestingly, when you talk about public sentiment, it's actually quite split. The general public, according to several media surveys over the weekend, the general public is in support of the release of the water. But of course, this sentiment shifts drastically when it comes to the northeast region, where the release of the water would have a direct impact on their day-to-day lives. You asked how successful do I think the IAEA chief's visit was? Well, it was successful in the sense that he managed to complete all that is on his to-do list. He handed over the report, he oversaw the launch of the office in Fukushima. On that note, his trip was highly successful. But as you rightly pointed out earlier, the impending water release kind of dredged up a lot of very understandable fears and anxieties, especially since, the science may be sound, but there is always the potential for reputational damage and negative publicity, and this has an additional impact on the livelihood of local producers, fishermen, agriculture, farmers in the region. And to be honest, this, if I may be blunt, right, if the report were convincing enough, then there is actually no need for South Korea to be doing its own independent review. There's no basis for countries to maintain its import restrictions on or bans from around Fukushima, since the IAEA itself says there is nothing to fear. So I do think that there is a lot of room for controversy, a lot of questions that the IAEA still has to answer despite the report.
Right, and also it's all about making the public feeling safe about the water being released into the ocean, and also has to do with the consumption of seafood possibly from that region. Maybe that's why.
Definitely, yep.
Speaking of negative reactions from the Japanese fishermen, we also have to talk about the reactions from other countries. Now, U.S. in support of the IAEA's approval, and China is clearly against the plan. Now, how will Japan, do you think, convince China?
Well, this is a very difficult question because I do think that there are geopolitical elements in play as well. Yes, as you pointed out, China is very strongly against the plan. And interestingly enough, the IAEA expert panel comprised nuclear safety experts from 11 countries, including China. But despite that, China said that the IAEA report failed to carry the full conclusions of those involved. It accused Japan of using a foregone conclusion since its decision to release the water came before the scientific backing. So I do see kind of a political element to this. The discharge, no matter how safe, can be easily weaponized for geopolitical purposes. And by being vocal, I think China can portray itself as a defender of the interests of countries in the Pacific Island, amongst the Pacific Island nations that it has been trying to woo to its corner. So whilst it definitely is very important, and I highly applaud Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's efforts in terms of constant diplomacy by establishing talks at all levels, I actually do not think that Japan will fully convince China of its plan until the results of the discharge are in and the results can speak for themselves.
Sure. All right, Walter, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Japan this morning. You have a great day.
Thank you very much.